Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy, and this is another of our midweek episodes. Very excited today to talk to Aaron Rupar. Aaron is an independent journalist and the publisher of the Public Notice newsletter on Substack, which covers U.S. politics and media. He's previously worked at Vox, where he covered Trumpism and the Trump administration. Most recently, he was also notably involved in a dust-up with Twitter's cheap twit Elon Musk, who temporarily permanently suspended him last month before lifting the suspension after much public outcry and a pretty goofy poll. Aaron, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get started and all the political craziness, a couple of things. One is we try to get a window into people's souls here. And one way to do that is to ask a couple of questions, one at the beginning, one at the end. First one is, are you a dog or a cat person?
Ooh. More of a cat person by default. When I was a kid, we had cats as pets. And actually, I have I wouldn't even say slight. It's kind of like a moderate allergy to dog dander. So like when I was in high school or, like whenever I've had to stay over at someone's house who has a dog, it can get kind of dicey where my eyes get all puffy. And so, actually my wife grew up with dogs. I'm not opposed to exploring getting a dog at some point, but we have 2 little kids. So that's enough. I don't really have the bandwidth for a dog, but yeah, I do have that kind of factor where I do have a slight allergy to dogs. So
Right.
Fortunately, that is what it is, but I grew up with cats and love cats very much.
All right. You just made 2 cat people in the room here. Very happy. And I have 2 cats. I also have 2 dogs. Actually, I have 4 dogs living with me right now because I have a couple of kids living with me who have...
I have a lot of opinions about dogs that I don't really share publicly. I get very annoyed as a runner with people who have their dogs off leash all the time.
I totally get that.
I just think people kind of, they always assume that their dogs are little angels and don't, couldn't possibly annoy anyone or nip at people and things like that. But these are opinions I try to keep to myself because I know that they're not very popular.
I totally get it. I mean, when I go running and I pass, this dog is always barking at me behind a small fence. And I know he's looking at me like spare ribs at a barbecue. And I'm just praying that dog is trained or there's an electronic fence or something because it's pretty damn scary, But I think...
Yeah, no, totally. And I've been bit a couple times as a running, never severely, but just kind of nipped at. But it's still, I kind of have that internalized now where, if a dog comes running at me, you kind of have that fight or flight mechanism that still kicks in because, again, people always assume their dog would never do such a thing. But in fact, their dogs will do that, or at least some of them do. Not all dogs, hashtag, I don't want to kind of have a blanket criticism here, but yeah, anyway, I try to keep those opinions to myself because I know it'd probably cost me Twitter followers if I express them publicly.
And one thing we know about cats is that they probably are not going to be running out of the house to chase after joggers. So
no, we did have a cat when I was young that was an outside cat that we would let kind of run around. Tragically, and I guess probably unsurprisingly, that cat was ultimately hit by a car and killed, which was very, very sad. I was in high school when that happened. But then cats that we had after that were indoor cats. We kind of learned our lesson there. That cat's name was Joey, and he was a very smart cat. Actually, one story I remember was he would climb up my parents. They had a deck with like wooden stanchions that kind of led up to the deck area, and he tracked down a squirrel, which he killed, and then had the squirrel in his mouth, climbed into my parents' bedroom while they were sleeping, and set down the dead squirrel at the base of their bed while they were sleeping. So they woke up. He was very proud of this.
Yeah, cats love that shit.
Obviously, my parents were horrified, but such are the joys of having an outdoor cat.
Yeah. Good morning, Mom and Dad. Squirrel. Yeah, they love that. My cats would do that with mice, which was certainly not as pleasant as if they brought a squirrel in. What were you like as a child? I have this thing that like people who are involved in politics as adults have to have had that interest originate at some point in their childhood. For example, when I was 8 years old, I was hanging out at Richard Nixon's local campaign office and handing out buttons and bumper stickers. So,
Wow.
Yeah. Wow, right? Who knew?
Yeah.
What about you? Like as a little kid, when you were 8 years old, were you just out playing sports or doing all kinds of science projects? Or were you literally like watching Walter Cronkite talk about, whoever?
I've always been since I started reading, I've always been very interested in news and reading news media. And I've always been an avid reader. And I think my interest in politics kind of comes more from, in college I studied philosophy and poli-sci, but, I was always kind of more interested in philosophy and theory and things like that than I was in politics per se. I've never been like a hugely political person, although I've done some canvassing, and I worked for a short period for the Democratic Party in Minnesota in between jobs in journalism. So, I have active in politics, but I wouldn't say that as a kid I was especially political. I was much more of kind of your typical, I had two younger brothers. We were very into sports. We were very into professional wrestling, even kind of things like that, more so than being obsessed with politics. But, I remember that I was still a little bit too young to vote in 2000 when Bush versus Gore happened. But I remember that as being kind of one of the first huge political news stories that I sort of followed as it happened, and kind of got invested into the coverage, at that time of just the controversy surrounding that election and, of course, the Supreme Court case and all of that stuff. And so that's, kind of, I remember getting kind of more actively interested in politics around that time. Both of my parents, they're not retired, but they were both career school teachers. And so they have always been pretty liberal, and active with like the teachers unions and things like that, supporting unions. And they're from a part of Minnesota called the Iron Range, which was an organized labor hotbed when they were kids. So, I've always kind of had, family, and I've been kind of immersed in left of center politics, I would say. But yeah, that's actually, I hadn't totally thought about how I ended up getting into political journalism. But like I said, I think it kind of came more from my interests academically than being, directly involved myself in politics. And I kind of got into it gradually because I wasn't really covering politics as a journalist until I was around 28, 29 years old, a decade ago. So yeah, I mean, it was always kind of I've always had an interest in it, but I wouldn't say that it was something that I was obsessed with at any point. Even to this day, I mean, I like to do the evenings kind of decompress. I like to watch sports, I mean, it's certainly when the news cycle calls for it, I can do kind of the full immersion and, just follow politics for days on end. But, especially in the realm that I'm in with video clipping, like Asen, for instance, who, he and I are friends, but he's so immersed, every evening and watching everything that happens on Fox News and tweeting out every single clip from these interviews. And I just need to have a little bit, especially with kids these days, a little bit of a division between work and play. And so, I certainly, I'm fascinated by politics and I'm very grateful that I get to cover it for a living, but I still, maybe that's a Libra in me. I need to have kind of that balance between that and other things in my life.
Fellow Libra right here.
Okay,
so
there you go.
Back at University of Minnesota, you were a teaching assistant in philosophy, right?
That's right.
So in philosophy, the classes included logic, contemporary moral problems. It must drive you crazy to be in politics because none of those things apply to politics anymore, right?
Well, that training
or does that help you, right?
In terms of, yeah, well, it helps me as someone who covers it in the sense of I can spot a fallacy when I see one, or, with just kind of the basic reasoning that obviously is a huge part of making any sort of political argument, advocating for a specific policy. There are a lot of bad arguments out there, and I think that people would benefit in general, if they had more of a background in logic, just in the sense of, kind of thought training and teaching you how to think, giving you tools to evaluate arguments that other people are making. So between that and then, I think media literacy is a big part of it too, where, I think we've all had those people in our lives, that we'll see on Facebook, for instance, who are just kind of anything they read, they assume is true on social media, or they can't spot that, they'll read a news article that's really thinly sourced and they can't really assess the credibility of information that they're consuming. And so, for me, I guess that was kind of a piece with studying logic and contemporary moral problems, just that ability to try and unpack the things that people are saying so you can assess whether there's actually any basis to it or how credible specific sources are.
So let's address the 800-pound gorilla in the room from last month. You're a very public dust up with Twitter's chief twit, Elon Musk, and your temporary permanent suspension. Give the background a little bit on that. What happened there?
Yeah. So the long and short of it is that, I've been obviously quite critical of Elon Musk, both on Twitter and in my newsletter. I think it was probably more of a coincidence than anything, but The day before my suspension, I did a newsletter item looking at Elon Musk and his brand of populism and how he kind of has a very sort of perverted notion of what populism is, because it's all kind of punching down at marginalized communities instead of kind of building a coalition of people from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know what role kind of my criticisms played in all of this, but certainly I think I was on his radar as a journalist who is critical of him. Over the months he had replied to some tweets of mine, and so I clearly seemed to be on his radar.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what happened was I had posted a tweet around the time that he had banned the Twitter account that was tracking his private jet, simply noting that, if you wanted to continue following this account, it might not have been on Twitter at that point, but you could still follow it on Facebook, because that same account was active over on Facebook. And so I posted a link to that. When my account was suspended, and basically what happened there was I was sitting around the condo actually playing with my kids, and I started getting messages from people, text messages, emails, Instagram messages saying, hey, your Twitter account's been suspended. What's going on? And so I pulled up my Twitter account, and it was on read-only mode. When I tried to hit a tweet, it would say, your account has been suspended. You can't perform this action on Twitter. And then a short time later, there was a notice appended to the top of my feed saying that my account had been permanently suspended, which was shocking news. And at first I couldn't figure out what I had done to cause that, because I had heard nothing from Twitter, and certainly I hadn't posted anything that I would have thought had violated any rules or anything like that. And so I was, my first emotion was kind of despondency over it, because obviously, my Twitter following is how I connect with my audience. It's how I get the word out about my newsletter, get my work out there in the world. And so losing that was, a huge blow initially. But then, within a few hours, well, just to back up one step, reporters were reaching out to me kind of asking what was going on. And one of them, Roger Sullenberger, who I believe is with the Daily Beast, he was the one that I remember kind of pieced it together where he was asking me why my account was suspended, and I told him I had no idea why. And then he asked me if I had possibly posted anything related to the Elon jet stuff. And I said, oh yeah, it actually took me a minute to kind of remember, oh yeah, yesterday I did post a link to the Facebook page. And he was the one that was kind of like, okay, I think everybody who has been suspended, the thing I'm figuring out here is that all of you had tweeted a link to this Facebook page. So he was the one who kind of put that together. And then eventually I did hear from Twitter many hours later, kind of confirming that the offending tweet was that one where I linked to this Facebook page. But within a few hours of being suspended, it started to become clear to me that it wasn't actually going to be a permanent suspension. And when Elon started posting polls asking people when we should be unsuspended. And so, like I said, initially I was quite bummed out over the whole thing. But, within a few hours, as I had all these subscribers flooding in, I kind of became this folk hero of sorts on Twitter. It became clear that actually for me personally, it was going to work out pretty well just in raising my profile and kind of tapping me into different audiences and gaining subscribers and things like that. And then, of course, there was a week or two where I was doing a ton of TV hits and all of these different podcasts. And so obviously the broader context is a bummer just in terms of what's happening to Twitter and, what that whole incident, what that signal about where Twitter is going. But, I ended up getting my account unsuspended the very next day, as it turned out. And I know that some of the journalists who were suspended along with me, including Donnie O'Sullivan at CNN, I believe he is still suspended because he refused to delete the tweet that caused his suspension and chose to appeal. And I credit him for that. I mean, my sense, and the reason that I didn't go that route was that Twitter has no infrastructure to deal. There's no process for appealing really at this point. It's all kind of up to the whims of the
Right.
very small staff that they have. And so sure, you could kind of fall on your sword over that. But I think another thing is that working in the video space like I have for many years, there have been at least 2 or 3 times where my account has been locked for just complete silliness, where I remember one occasion I posted a video from a Trump rally before Trump started speaking, and in the background there was like an AC/DC song playing or something like that. And that resulted in my account being suspended because posting a video with that song, Sony did some sort of sweep and they accused me of like stealing their song in a little Twitter video, which is obviously absurd because it was at this Trump rally. But anyway, the point being that my
Did they
account has been
actually
suspended
come
for
after
3
you,
months.
but not Trump?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the idea was I had permission to post the song. And I don't know if someone with the Trump campaign would have posted a similar video. It's all algorithmic, so I'm assuming they would have gotten in trouble too.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the point simply being that when you do video work, your account can get suspended for all sorts of nonsense all the time. And so I just kind of view this as like, okay, whatever, I'll delete the tweet and just continue on with my life. But, there are these other journalists who are kind of fighting it out and their accounts are still suspended. And granted, if you're with CNN or the New York Times, maybe that's okay. But someone like me, that really makes it difficult for me to continue doing my job. Now, granted, I've spent the past month building out followings on different platforms. I think I'm up to like 80,000 followers on Post, which has been nice. And, I've got a few thousand on Mastodon. And so I'm trying to, be proactive in making sure that Elon Musk doesn't have this power over me going forward. But anyway, so that's kind of what happened. That was, I think about a month ago now. And so I've tried not to tangle with him on Twitter since then.
Well, I was going to ask you, how has that impacted?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the net effect of when someone like Musk does what he does, which is to really just squelch opposition and opposing viewpoints in a very authoritarian kind of way, when he is the judge and the jury, I think his intended effect is to curtail people like you from saying negative things that he believes are negative about him. And has that impacted you that way? Like when you start tweeting, do you realize, oh my God, this might be something that Elon suspends me again for? And like, are you self-editing now because of what happened to you?
I honestly, to a point, I am. I try not to when it comes to important things about kind of like the direction of Twitter, and just observations about how Twitter is functioning. Or, I interviewed Lynette Lopez, who was another journalist who was suspended about her investigations of Tesla, and kind of, so I try not to pull punches on the big things, but like in terms of like kind of shit posting in his replies or, just kind of taking pot shots, I certainly have been reluctant to do that just because, I don't want my account to get suspended again. I don't want to give him any reason to do that. So, I mean, that feels, it isn't great. I mean, that is sort of a dynamic of like an authoritarian system where
exactly.
I think, as you rightly kind of pointed out, I mean, it is meant to have a chilling effect on criticism and critical coverage of him. But you also kind of have to, in an authoritarian system, I guess, kind of choose your battles a little bit.
Right.
And so I've been trying to kind of lay low in terms of, not being in his replies or kind of quote tweeting him and letting other people kind of do
like
that
me.
stuff because, again, I'm trying to keep my nose clean to the extent that I can.
Yeah. When you first saw the poll, I know what I thought when I saw that. My thought was, this guy's really running this company based on this kind of management strategy. This is how he's going to, change or not change a key decision that he just made. What was your thought when you first saw it?
Pretty much exactly what you similar to yours, where it was like, is this really how this is going to play out? But the thing that was really interesting about that was previous to then, I think that was really kind of the first instance that I can remember where Elon posted a Twitter poll and the result was not the one that he wanted. Because I think the options in the first poll that he posted in terms of when the account should be unsuspended, one was like right now, one was a day, one was a week, and then the fourth one was longer. And the result that won was right now. And so then that was when, I don't know if you remember this, he basically said, there were too many options in this poll. I'm going to redo it. So he just threw it out.
Do over.
And then he did another one, but the only two options in the second one were right now and a week from now, I believe. And then again, right now, one. And then after the 24 hours of voting, that was when my account was reinstated. And
then he also,
a pretty silly way.
Yeah. Then he also tweeted like a poll of like, should I step down as CEO? Yep. And the result, I mean, look, I'm not a lawyer, but I have a lot of lawyer friends, and they always say, like, when you're a lawyer, like, never bring up anything in court that you don't already have the answer to. Okay? There's no surprises. And so what would make him think that the answer was not going to be yes, step down? But yet he's still there. And right after it, he was like, no, I'm gonna look for someone who, might just be stupid enough to take this job. And you're like, well, after you just said that, who's going to take the job, right? So it's like he's sabotaging his own process. So clearly his polls mean nothing, but they do indicate like just how erratic he is and impulsive he is in running that company.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I feel like he's been trying to. He hasn't been kind of weighing in as explicitly, at least not that I've noticed, on political topics in recent weeks. Of course, he's been pushing these Twitter files, and there's a lot of politics involved in those. But I do wonder if, of course, I think it's later this month, in just a week or so, that his first interest payment is due on the debt that he incurred to buy Twitter, which is a huge amount of money. And there's been a lot of, there was reporting from, I believe it was Casey Newton at Platformer, that Twitter's revenue, this was just a couple days ago, he reported that the year-over-year revenue compared to a year ago is down 40%. And, so it might not be, especially with Tesla stock tanking, I mean, there might really be some financial constraints. And obviously, I think Elon's political opinions were only kind of damaging his brand and Twitter's brand. And so I don't doubt that he probably is interested in bringing on a CEO and kind of distancing himself a little bit from this. Of course, the CEO would probably still answer to him and be an ideological bedfellow of his. So I'm not really expecting, I'm not expecting it to kind of revert back to how it was when it was publicly traded company and there was more transparency and more of like a rules-based order on Twitter. But, I have kind of noticed, because, he's one of those people in the past where it seemed like whenever people weren't talking about him, that was when he would kind of, weigh in with some sort of outrageous tweet that would kind of get people mad at him and everybody would start talking about him. And I feel like he's not been doing as much of that lately. Granted, I don't follow him kind of for the reasons we already talked about, where I don't want to be baited into responding to everything that he says on Twitter. And in that respect, the dynamic reminds me a lot of when Trump was tweeting all the time, where you could spend all day just kind of replying to Trump. And granted, Trump's tweets are a lot more significant given that he was president of the United States.
There's a lot of similarity between, there's so much similarity between him and Trump, and more so if you read the comments from people, like if you do say something disparaging about Musk, the comments that come back at you, it's literally like the MAGA crowd. It's the same, like, we have a cult leader, he can do no wrong, there's no reality to anything, truth doesn't matter, it gets, a little, the civility goes out the window. It's so similar to how Trump created his own Twitter online personality and subsequently the people who follow and defend and protect him, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I think it's very similar even when you look at Elon's replies, where it's extremely polarizing. Like you're saying, you have kind of the fanboys who are basically giving him a high five every time he posts, and then you have sort of liberals, are debunking or calling him up for lying and things like that. So it's that same sort of hyper polarized response that people have.
It's like megalomania,
again, it's almost like an absurd version of the Trump thing, because the stakes seem so small compared to Trump. When Trump was on there, threatening nuclear war against North Korea and things like that. I mean, those are real kind of serious issues. And with the Elon Musk stuff, it's like, well, I'm going to ruin Twitter's algorithm, which kind of stinks. I wish he wouldn't have done that, but this whole experience has kind of opened my eyes a little bit that even on social media, there's going to be a world beyond Twitter. It might take some time for for people to kind of, it might take some time for an alternative to kind of consolidate as the alternative, but that will happen.
What do you think happens to Twitter? Where's it going?
It's a good question. I don't think it's going anywhere great right now. And I think the most notable thing over the past week, as I'm sure you have noticed, is the introduction of this new algorithmic timeline. And I thought it was amusing that Elon kind of gave the game away on this, where it's basically meant to be kind of rage engagement, where, like, for me, because I'm obviously liberal and I follow mostly liberal accounts I follow some conservatives too, but it's called For You on there. The algorithmic feed is all kind of right wingers. It's trying to get me to follow Ben Shapiro and Jim Jordan and kind of that, that class of people on there, Steven Crowder. And then, but the funny thing is, I posted a few tweets on that, and then people have kind of been encouraging me to look at what right wingers are saying. And if you read kind of like Charlie Kirk had a post about this and some other right wingers as well, where their For You timeline is all left wing people. And so they're kind of complaining about the same stuff, where it's like, I don't want to follow these people. Why are they being pushed into my timeline? The simple fix to that is just doing the following timeline, which is just the chronological of people that you're following. And so it kind of, I used to like Twitter's algorithmic thing because it would do a pretty good job flagging tweets that were of interest to me sort of at the top of my timeline.
Mm-hmm.
But the chronological one is fine. But, so anyway, that seems like no one is happy with this new algorithmic feed that they introduced. Everybody's complaining about it. I've seen even Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo last night was tweeting that it really felt for him like this is the first thing that is like a disincentive to use Twitter, that it's so annoying to him that it's causing him to kind of reconsider, his usage in terms of how much time he's spending on the platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the more that Elon gives people incentives to reconsider how much time they're spending on Twitter, if they even want to use Twitter, if they want to be on other platforms, that's not good, for him or for Twitter's business. And like I just mentioned earlier, I mean, their revenue is reportedly down 40% year over year.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like it's, it doesn't seem like the business was already not that healthy, of course, even before he took over, which was part of the reason the board was so open to, to him buying them out and taking the company private. And it seems like it's only gotten worse since then. But, it's not an area, and this was kind of the irony of me sort of being in Elon's crosshairs and kind of becoming this, having this celebrity surrounding getting suspended, is that it's not like this was something I was doing deep reporting on. I had done reporting on kind of how he was running Twitter and just sort of what that meant for users, but I've never done investigations of Tesla or like really been that interested in Elon Musk per se before he took over Twitter. So, I don't really have like deep insight into how he's going to, what it's going to mean long term or what like his exit strategy might be. Just like everybody else, I'm just someone who's kind of been using the platform. It just so happened that my platform on there was larger than most people. And so it brought me to his attention in a way that if I wasn't high profile on there, maybe he never would have noticed me, which, it ended up backfiring spectacularly on him, not just with me, but suspending all these other journalists as well. And so
Keith Olbermann was another one.
To the extent that he's able to take in new information and kind of change his behaviors, hopefully that was kind of a cautionary tale that was a pretty major overstepping of how we should be running it.
But, if he's impulsive the way we know he is, and he's megalomaniac, which we know he is, it's hard to fathom him not keeping Twitter alive no matter what. I mean, when you're the richest man in the world or the second richest person in the world, you've got the money to do that. But it's like when you think about like Twitter being a town square, we now have an owner of the town square who's gated off all the entrances to the park. He lets you in. If you cannot protest, you can't hang up a sign, you can't say anything. I mean, that's dangerous shit. If you're him, it's like orgasmic. It's like the best thing in the world. I don't see him. He can't get that from Tesla. He certainly can't get it from SpaceX. But the question I want to ask you is, as a company, is Twitter too big to fail? In the sense that we would judge any other company going through similar kind of things, with revenue being down, with advertisers abandoning the ship by reports of up to 90%. Is it too big to fail, though? Will he keep it alive forever just because it gives him a Woody?
I mean, I would think so, just in that, working in the media space and especially being like an entrepreneur in this space, the main thing, like just getting that many eyeballs onto your platform seems almost impossible to screw up with the amount of time that people spend on Twitter. Now, granted, it's not the eyeballs in and of themselves that makes Twitter too big to fail. It's the business opportunities that creates around advertising, like in my case, promoting newsletters, because Twitter in and of itself has never really been that monetizable. It's not like YouTube or Facebook, where basically both of those, if you post video on there, companies will insert ads into your videos and then you get a cut of that as a creator. Like Twitter never has really had that. There's little they do with like the recount or like outlets that are doing a lot of original video. You can get a small slice, but basically it's a vessel for people to monetize and promote other websites or services that are monetized for that. But there's a lot that goes into that, where one of the big problems that Twitter had before Elon took over was that they were so overstaffed that became a really easy target in terms of trying to get their books in shape, was just to lay off a bunch of people and force a bunch of people out. And so it might be too big to fail, but I don't know what that looks like. And one thing I'll just kind of mention along these lines is, I posted a tweet about this last week. When they rolled out this For You timeline, the first time I looked at that, there were a couple posts in there from Cat Turd, one of, who's an Elon Musk favorite and Trump used to retweet Cat Turd all the time. I'm not sure if Cat Turd is a him or her or a group of people, but in any event, one of the tweets that was promoted into my timeline, I don't follow this person, was something to the effect of, boy, if I was vaccinated right now, I'd be really worried. And it was kind of alluding to, this idea that people on the right have that, people who are vaccinated are just dropping dead like flies, which obviously is not true. But I mean, just think about the danger in that that was something that Twitter used to be very careful about trying to suppress and ban people, who would say stuff like that was not in accordance with public health science and was dangerous misinformation. And now, not only is stuff like that not being banned or suppressed, it's being promoted. And so, that kind of, not only is that like very dangerous in and of itself, but imagine being a company, imagine being Snickers or something, and you're considering an ad buy with Twitter. Do you really want to associate your brand with a platform that is harmful in that way?
Right.
And I think, more and more, and that's why, I'm sure you've noticed this too, the ads that I see on Twitter these days are extremely low quality. I mean, it's basically a notch above My Pillow, and in some cases even lower than that, because it's kind of these like, salacious, almost like pornographic clickbait sites and things like that. And I feel like even as recently as 6 months ago, the ads that you would see on Twitter were much more mainstream and kind of reputable brands. And so, I'm not smart enough to know in terms of, I haven't done enough reporting and I don't have enough insight to know what that means long-term for Twitter, but just kind of basing on what I'm seeing now, you asked if it's too big to fail. I think in some form it probably is, but I just don't know what that looks like. And I don't know at what point, for people like you and myself, at what point do we cut bait, kind of say, this just isn't worth it, I don't want to validate this any longer, or spend my time here.
Right.
I'm not there yet, but it seems like, we could get there before too long.
My co-producer, Matty, is a big critic of Musk and Twitter, and he's a big fan of yours. So, Matty, do you have a question you want to ask?
I was wondering what you think about his citizen journalism nonsense.
Yeah, well, first of all, I do think there is something to that, in the sense that, I got on Twitter in 2011, but I remember in 2009, first of all, one of the first nights that I was on Twitter just happened to be the night that Osama bin Laden was killed. And you guys probably remember as well, there was I don't remember the guy who did this, but he was, I believe it was Abbottabad. I might be mispronouncing that, but that was a city in Pakistan that bin Laden was hanging out in. And then, of course, there was a raid that killed him. And there was a guy who spoke English who was in that city in Pakistan who sort of live tweeted the raid. Because remember, he saw helicopters and posted a photo, and then those helicopters were identified as U.S. military helicopters. And then, a few hours later, news broke that bin Laden had in fact been killed. And so I remember that just happened to be one of the first nights that I was on Twitter. And right away, it was kind of like, wow, that's amazing that this guy sort of had the scoop on this hours before, publicly it was confirmed. And then even going before I was on Twitter, of course, the Arab Spring in 2009, there was a lot of people tweeting videos and photos of that, as it happened, people on the ground. And so, there are contexts in which I definitely think there's something to that. It can be a powerful tool for citizen journalism, but I don't think Elon is really the best messenger for that. When we reflect on the first weekend after he took over, he notoriously tweeted out that homophobic conspiracy theory about Paul Pelosi, that the guy who assaulted him was actually his gay lover, and that it was a lover's quarrel sort of thing, which was debunked almost immediately, and then he deleted it without any sort of acknowledgement. And so if that's what he's talking about with citizen journalism, that's a lot more harmful than it is helpful. But I do think there's something obviously to that. We see that obviously even on Instagram stories, people are in conflict zones, posting eyewitness accounts. That's one of the most cool things about social media, is it gives us kind of that immediacy into places where even, credentialed reporters can't often get there or be there, but it all kind of depends on how you're doing it. And I think that with Elon, I mentioned earlier kind of the media literacy piece of all of this, and he seems to be, whether it's kind of bad faith or this is just how he thinks about the world, he doesn't really seem to have that capability of sort of filtering out bad information from good information. And so if you don't have that filter, and you're kind of credulous and you believe most of what you read on the internet, not only does it kind of undermine the point of citizen journalism, but it can be kind of actively harmful both to yourself and others. So, I get what he's trying to say with that, but, if you really wanted to make Twitter, cultivate the spirit of citizen journalism, one of the important things is to have guardrails so you're kind of filtering out the misinformation and making it a safe place for users to spend time. And that seems to be a very low priority for him.
Yeah, I mean, there a lot of the MAGA crowd and people on the right, they attack the mainstream media, and it's not a perfect institution, but when you read something in the New York Times, you need to really understand that it's going through fact checkers and a legal team and an editorial hierarchy. Like, they just don't put shit out, right? And the problem with citizen journalism is when you talk about misinformation and fact checking, and I think the way he's interpreting, because I think you're right about videos and overseas and being aware of conflict and things like that, injustice around the world. But I think he's sort of doing it in that Trumpian mainstream media is the enemy of the public kind of way. And like just every Tom, Dick, and Harry in Iowa should be able to just blog away. And that's where we get our real journalism. And that's dangerous. In our remaining minutes, I want to ask you about some topical issues. You got a post out today on your Substack, public notice newsletter. It's about McCarthy in the House. What do you say, and I quote, news that House oversight is now controlled by a basket of deplorables is the latest indication that McCarthy sold the farm to become House Speaker. And then you say, McCarthy has put the inmates in charge of the asylum. Of course, we're talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, and Scott Perry, who were added. I mean, as he's kicking out Swalwell and Schiff from their important committees, he's bringing on these lunatics into the Oversight Committee and also adding George Santos to committees. What do you make of the chaos and the drama there? And what do you think the next 2 years is going to be like?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of surreal. And maybe you had this experience as well. That first week, even including the votes for House Speaker, it immediately transported me back to the first 2 years of the Trump administration. And I had kind of, I remembered, but I'd kind of forgotten how crazy the House was in those years. Every hearing was like these Republicans just trying to craft a 20-second soundbite for Hannity, more so than actually doing anything constructive.
Right.
And so now we're right back into that mode. And that was kind of the theme of my newsletter today, is that basically House Oversight is like a Tucker Carlson panel now. Where it's all of these Republicans who go on there, on a weekly basis and, basically try to own the libs. And so that's what we're going to be in for 2 years. And it is just kind of frustrating to me that is what voters decided they wanted out of the next 2 years of U.S. politics, because it's obviously not constructive in any way, shape, or form. But it's also not really surprising because, the notion of Republican moderates is more of a myth than anything at this point. I mean, there may be a few you could point to, guys like Representative Bacon from Nebraska. There's very few, though. It's kind of an endangered species of Republicans who have some reasonableness and, some willingness to compromise. And so one of the kind of interesting outcomes of this most recent election was that obviously it wasn't a good election for MAGA. A lot of those Trump's candidates lost in the general after winning in the primaries. But what that ended up doing was it really, even though the fringe was rejected by voters, it ended up empowering the fringe, because if Republicans had a larger majority, people like the Scott Perrys and the Boeberts could be ostracized, and McCarthy might not need those votes. But now he finds himself in a position where, with only a 4 or 5 seat majority, he needs absolutely every single vote that he can get, including George Santos, as you mentioned. And so, what I'm expecting is that we're going to have a lot of hearings that they will make for fascinating, if not demoralizing, television. We've seen a lot of these hearings, like I mentioned early in the Trump years, Supreme Court confirmation hearings, you name it. A lot of the hearings surrounding the push to repeal the ACA, I remember being kind of circus-like at the time. But, obviously anything that the House does is pretty much going to be dead on arrival at the Senate or White House, with the exception, of course, of the debt limit fight, which is kind of the next big fight that's immediately on the horizon right now, and that McCarthy and the radical House Republicans do actually have a lot of power, because the bill obviously has to go through both chambers to really cause problems for the U.S. and global economies by not raising the debt limit. There's ways around that with like a discharge position where you could have a majority that might not include McCarthy. but I'm not sure that you're going to have Republicans breaking ranks on that. And so, bottom line is that I think we're in for a circus for the next 2 years. It'll make for good video clipping, but I wish that, I would sacrifice the video clips for a more functional Congress for the next 2 years, but it is what it is at this point.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of the Biden-Trump mishandled documents thing? I mean, there's, we could sit and talk to 50 different people and probably get 50 different perspectives ranging from, they're equal and then, false equivalencies to what Trump did was bad and Biden did is okay, or vice versa. But, the conventional wisdom as of right now is this is going to hurt Biden politically. It's kind of a gift to Trump. I'm not so sure of that myself, but I'm wondering what you think.
Well, first of all, had Trump handled the classified documents that were in his possession in places that they shouldn't have been in the way that Biden did, it never would have been this level of problem for him. Mm-hmm. Had his lawyers gone to the archives and said, hey, we found these documents, here they are, feel free to investigate to get to the bottom of how they got here, what happened. The problem for Trump was that he spent over a year refusing to give the documents back and then lying about them, lying about not having any more in his possession, obstructing. So that's the big difference. But, in terms of Biden specifically, my hunch, and I don't know this, and I'm very open to seeing where these investigations go, but my hunch is that this is going to turn out to be kind of a clerical error where, somehow these documents got into his possession. I don't know if, they were, first of all, it's important to note that the archives did not even know that these documents were not there. Whereas with Trump, they did a review to see what they had in their possession, and they identified specific documents that they did not have that they then went to the Trump people and said, hey, where are these things? So that to me kind of indicates that, or at least suggests that this was more of a clerical error where these documents ended up in his residence. Maybe he didn't know that they were there. I do think, unfortunately, that the lack of information is a very fertile space for conspiracy theories and for kind of inferring the worst. I mean, Fox has been running with this narrative that Hunter Biden was looking at these documents because they're at Biden's house and Hunter was there.
JFK Jr. was looking at them.
I think that, what's that?
JFK Jr. was looking at them.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, so the quicker that information can kind of get out there, I think the better. Not that getting information out there will undercut any of the conspiracy theories, because we know how that works. They will just get more and more outlandish.
Well, it's kind of the same thing like with Garland, Merrick Garland appointing a special prosecutor. It depends on who your ultimate audience is, right? If, for example, the Biden-Trump documents thing is to hopefully get the other side to go, oh, wow, that was a really thorough, fair, balanced investigation, and I accept the result. Same way with Garland saying, okay, the special prosecutor might ultimately conclude that Biden isn't criminally responsible for anything and won't be charged, but Trump is. It's not like the MAGA crazies are going to be like, well, we have confidence in both of these special prosecutors and we accept the outcome. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all optics and it's performative. And that's why Garland, as Attorney General, just has to do his job. And in the case of the documents, it's the same thing. Just the Justice Department, FBI, they just have to do their job because politically speaking, it's never going to change in this toxic partisan climate, change the opinions of the people, either on the left or on the right.
Yeah. And I do think that Garland had to appoint a special counsel in both instances. The one thing that I am kind of annoyed with, although I'm open to information that kind of causes me to reassess this, is that it took him months to get around to appointing one for Trump when it was very clear that Trump had egregiously mishandled these classified documents. And, part of that might have to do with the FBI raid happened in August, and then, there's kind of this quiet period leading into the midterms, and then the special counsel was announced like a week later. But that, there was a very protracted process, and with Biden, it was like immediate. It was like right away the next day, he was having a news conference, and there was a special counsel.
Yeah.
I think he had to in both cases. I'm a little bit worried about the special counsel in the Biden case just because it is a Trump appointee. And, there are people who have concerns about kind of whether that, his last name is Hugh, whether he will actually follow the facts or whether there's going to be kind of a political axe to grind there with that investigation. But, I definitely would push back on any equivalencies between the Biden and Trump situations. But I do think it's impossible to argue with the idea that it is a political gift to Trump just because it gives him a way to kind of minimize his own conduct and to portray himself as being a victim of basically a political conspiracy. And obviously that's a huge part of Trumpism, is playing the victim, always portraying yourself as the victim. And this just gives him another way to do that. Now, whether that will actually kind of break through to the broader public, I mean, the people I see screaming loudest about this are people who are already guzzling the mega Kool-Aid. So, I'm not really sure it's going to resonate, in terms of really hurting Biden in 2024 or hurting Democrats. I'm not sure about that, but
you have people like James Comer,
that Trump can use for use.
You have like James Comer, who's the chairman of the Oversight Committee, and he's like he talks about Biden as if Trump didn't do any of the stuff we know Trump did. It's like, Jake Tapper the other day tried to press him and like, where are you on Trump? I mean, so look, if Biden did something bad, put him in prison. But that doesn't mean Biden doing something bad doesn't mean Trump is off the hook. It's just a weird so you forget the MAGA people at home in the middle of the country or wherever they are. It's the chairman of the Oversight Committee who has that kind of philosophy, Well,
and that, I thought that was, it was notable because Comer on CNN, he basically just caved, where Tapper was kind of like, why don't you care about the Trump documents? And he was like, oh, I do care, and we're going to investigate that too. And it's like, give me a break, like when he goes on Fox, he definitely plays to his audience there, and then he goes on CNN and tries his best to play the audience there.
Yeah, I think ultimately, if I could sum up the real difference between the two cases with the documents, is you have one side who found documents and said, oh my God, here they are. And you have another side that goes, they're mine. Okay, you can't run away from they're mine. That just says it all. My last question to you is the other window in the soul question, into the soul question. And music is the best window into one's soul. So give us your top 5 musical artists of all time.
Wow, boy. I would have to put John McLaughlin, the guitarist, is one of my favorites, jazz guitarist from England. I had the privilege of seeing him in DC. I'm actually in his last international tour. That was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago now, but he's a personal favorite. Pat Metheny, along similar lines. Pat Metheny Group has been a longtime favorite of mine. Jazz was more of my interest, like when I was in college. I played a lot of jazz as a gigging musician in my 20s, man. So those are kind of my 2 favorite jazz people. Then I listen to a lot of rock and roll as well. I could not put the Rolling Stones in my top 5, and I'd probably have to put the Beatles in there too, just because I grew up on that stuff. So, if you put me on an island and I could only listen to 5 bands, I think they would have to be in there. And then for a 5th one, man, I'm gonna have to be the homer here, being from Minnesota, and I'm gonna have to put Prince in there too.
Okay.
I saw Prince a number of times back in the day, including at Paisley Park, and I've been a huge Prince fan going back. He's a very polarizing figure in Minnesota. I had a neighbor in an apartment building I lived in, an older guy who went to school with Prince, who was not a Prince fan at all, because he had friends who would jam with Prince when they were in high school. Prince would record these jam sessions and then allegedly steal some of the best ideas for his own songs and not really give proper credit. So there are a lot of stories in the Twin Cities about stuff like that with Prince, when, not necessarily being the most virtuous teenager, in his 20s sort of thing. But, especially his early albums are personal favorites of mine. And so when he passed, I was in DC living there, and it blew me away the extent to which he became kind of this international icon. Not that he wasn't already, but he had been toiling in the wilderness for like 25 years, releasing music that not a lot of people were really listening to, and, kind of, working in obscurity. And then when he passed away, it was like all of a sudden he became one of the biggest stars in the world, or people once again reminded of his greatness kind of overnight. So I'd have to put him there too. So yeah, I put Beatles, Rolling Stones, Prince, Pat Metheny, John McLaughlin would be my 5 top musicians.
It's a good list. And, Prince, it's funny you say what you said, because after I wasn't a huge Prince fan, like during the Prince decades. But when he died, I said that to a friend of mine, and he was like, what? He's like one of the greatest artists that ever lived. And I was like, all right, this person who I trust is a big music aficionado. And I kind of went back, and I became one of those people that was like, my God, what did I not see? And then you watch, like, the guitar solo for, While My Guitar Gently Weeps from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like transcendent, and I'm a big Jimi Hendrix fan. And I think that was partly part of the reason I was like, he's just, he's a little more than derivative with Hendrix, but he was a brilliant genius of an artist. And
I'd recommend if people want to go back and revisit it, Sign of the Times to me is kind of his most classic album. It's a double album, but that's what people want to be reminded of. They just seen the YouTube clips or kind of the hits. That's an album that has some deeper cuts that I think that still sound very fresh, even 35 years later, whatever it is. I just very recently saw the Pet Shop Boys as well, which blew me. Like, they've been a personal favorite for a long time. I'd been wanting to see them it was actually a concert that I bought tickets for like 4 years ago, and then it kept getting rescheduled because of COVID. It was canceled like 3 times, and they were touring actually with New Order, so that was a really fun show to see. And then actually, I've been getting into kind of like deep house music, which I'll spare you that. But
there's where you lose me
when I'm working. What's that?
I said, there's where you lose me.
Yeah, no, I find it like when I'm working or trying to write, anything that has lyrics, I find to be kind of like overwhelming. And these days, having little kids, we listen to a ton of Baby Shark and
who doesn't?
Cocomelon and things like that.
Who doesn't?
Sadly, I've been like, it's not great stuff, but it keeps the kids calm. So, I'm willing to listen to it for hours on end if I can have peace at home.
Well, it was great having you on, Aaron. Hope you'll come back again, and
absolutely.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
So there you have it, episode 36 in the can. If you like what you've been hearing, and even if you don't, let us know. We appreciate the feedback. You can leave us a message at 845-307-7446, email us at backroomandy@gmail.com, or tweet to me at Andy Ostroy. And when you listen, please take a quick moment to rate and review. It's very helpful. I want to thank my co-producer, engineer, and editor, Matty Rosenberg, associate producer, Jen Hammoud, Cricket Lengyel for our artwork, Andy Hollander for our kick-ass music, Patricia Wind and the Epicurean for the Backroom Studio, and a big thank you again to our guest, Aaron Rupar. So keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards. We hope you'll join us again next time. Have a great week.